Okay. When I first started working on currencies, I had the idea of essentially taking what the Berkshires was doing in Massachusetts. Um, and with Berkshires, they were essentially allowing people to buy these currencies and at a discount, and they were allowing them to trade them, and then they could essentially exchange them back again. And my thought was that there was a lot of NGO activities, non-governmental organizations going out and paying for community service work. And so I thought, well, why don't we pay for that community service work with a voucher? And so I got together with about 75 businesses in a slum outside Mombasa called Kongowea, or the slums around Kongowea. And they, they were excited about the idea, and they encouraged me to go ahead and give it a try. And essentially what we did was we printed up these little paper vouchers basically on check paper, and we issued them initially like 50 shillings, like half a dollar, to every single business in that community. And they enjoyed trading with them, and it was a fun thing. And we did kind of a workshop with all of them, and the local chief and like all the village elders were involved, and there was this nominal circulation. And then we got donors involved to basically back up projects or activities with Kenyan shillings, with national currency. And what we would do is, based on that backing, we would issue the eco-paisa into circulation based on work in the community. So when the community would organize these big trash collection events or tree planting, all the kids and youth and adults, everyone would get, like 5 shillings worth. And the businesses, those 75 businesses, would organize those events, right? And they were the ones who were getting the bulk of that currency. So after these events, or even during the events, they would come out and say, hey, you can buy XYZ at my shop, buy some bread, buy whatever. And so everyone would collect trash, and it was exciting, it was a fun event, we'd have music, and then they would spend their money at those shops, and the shops would then trade it amongst each other. And at the end of every month, a certain amount, let's say like $5 worth, could be exchanged back for the donor funds, okay? And so it would circulate and circulate, and eventually, slowly by slowly, it would get exchanged back out into Kenyan shillings, and that was it. And that's how it was meant to be. It was meant to be sort of this one-off event, and we did about 5 of those events over the year, and we measured the circulation. We had unique serial numbers on all the bills, and we had youth that would go out and collect log books from the businesses, and we had a good dozen or so of those businesses that would really keep good records, and we would remunerate them for keeping those records of how much trade they were getting. So we had some estimates on how much was being traded, and we could say how much trash was collected and how much trees were planted, and we had something like 4 to 5 times what could have been done with the Kenyan shilling done, because it was really about mobilization. We got the whole community to do it. So it was effective, it was fun, and there was a lot of people, even once we ended the program, there was a lot of people who never cashed in their eco-paisa because it was fun for them to trade amongst their like 5 business neighbor friends. And so in these small groups, I could see that trade was just happening, and it didn't need backing. They were backing it essentially themselves. And to me, that was super exciting. And just the fact that we could essentially print money, that it was, these vouchers didn't, end us up in jail or anything like that. It was like, okay, great, this is doable. And so the next iteration of that, so once all those donor funds were over, I wanted to create a model that was much more of a pure mutual credit, right? That didn't require any backing whatsoever, that was using basically the model of, how these businesses with eco-paisa were still just circulating with each other. And so in this case, I was at a new location near a slum called Bangladesh, also near Mombasa, but a bigger slum. And again, I got together a group of, initially like 20 businesses, and we used a local school to have meetings, and we kept having, groups of 20 businesses over and over again. I think we did like 5 meetings like that with different groups around the community. And the idea was to create sort of a mutual guarantee system. So in order to get your initial amount of bangla-pesa, you would have to be backed by 4 other members also in the network, and they were your guarantors. So the idea was that these were vouchers based on your productive capacity, your goods and services, as you as a business. Okay, and so we worked with all the businesses in the community. I think very quickly we had over 100 businesses, and they each started with 400 bangla-pesa, and half of those would go to a community pot, and that community pot would pay for community service work and other stuff, like local administrative work and things like that. And the goal was really just to get this group together, have them registered as what's called a community-based organization, and have them basically self-manage the whole thing. So, you know, at that point I was still pretty much working alone, and the goal was basically print these things, do some training, and see how it goes. And that's essentially what I did. And within about 3 months of that in Bangladesh, the government came in, and what was happening was people were starting to try to pay bribes to the police with the bangla-pesa, and there was a lot of blowback from the local police because of this. And there was an article in the paper that came out and said, you know, these guys are trying to be secessionists, that we were trying to create our own country and things like this. And it was just kind of got really blown out of proportion. And the police came in and started knocking down doors, and they put me in jail along with about 4 other people from the community, and that really sucked. It was really not, I wouldn't recommend that at all. And you know, the failure on my side in that part was, you know, not foreseeing that it would get that big that fast, and not doing my due diligence with the local government as much as I should have. You know, on the flip side, that's expensive, and I didn't have funds to do that quote-unquote due diligence with local government as much as I should have. So in the end, the Attorney General took the case away and said there was no law being broken, and so that was actually a really good thing. It opened up the ability to now expand all over Kenya, and I mean, that was a long 6 months process of this court case and all that, and we had a lot of support from all around the world, including, you know, Berkshire's, from IRTA, the International Reciprocal Trade Association, from STRO, from a lot of grassroots organizations like Community Forge, like people from all around the world, like did petitions, and it was really sweet, and it really felt like there was this global movement of people pushing towards these new forms of economies. And so it was, I think, 2015 or 2014, 2015, we started working on, I started getting more and more volunteers and interns at that point. We really didn't have employees back then, and we started doing some work in Nairobi. And specifically, there was a German organization that was sponsoring schools in Nairobi, and those schools really wanted to start these programs, and they convinced their German counterparts to help print the currency for them. And so so basically I went to Nairobi and I trained these school teachers, and we started very similar programs there in Nairobi. We started 3 programs there, and then finally we started another one back in Mombasa. So there were 5 informal settlements in Nairobi. Very much they were kind of built around the schools. In Mombasa a little bit less so. It was more on the business side. And that got us to about, you know, 2016. And what I noticed by kind of the end of 2016 was that a lot of the trade in these organizations, in these groups, was kind of, again, it was sort of like similar to eco-paisa. It was small cluster groups that were trading with each other. And so you would get a group of 5, 10, you know, maybe 20 that were trading with one another on a regular daily basis. Other people maybe on a weekly basis or even monthly basis. But it wasn't really spreading to the rest of the community so much. It was really sort of hedged around sort of identity groups, if you will. Like, it was like for you to be part of this group and to be part of this community currency meant that you were sort of in with these people over here, right? It wasn't generic. It was sort of like, yeah, it was like you were in a gang, in a sense, if you will. You know, like you were in a group of people that were doing this thing. And a lot of people didn't want to be in those groups, right? They wanted to be free. And there's a lot of, you know, especially in the informal settlements, the different groups of people, different tribes, or just even different areas in the slum, they're very self-identified to a very strong degree. And so we wanted to come up with a way where people would feel more comfortable in terms of the backing as well. So when these currencies were circulating around, what if you had them and the person you go to all of a sudden doesn't accept them because maybe they don't like you, maybe you're the wrong tribe, or maybe, you know, and so to get past that sort of, you know, small cluster group mode, we said, okay, let's actually work with these groups and even larger groups in these communities and create cooperative structures where they have cooperatively run businesses. And those businesses would be designed in a way that their profits would be by default always available, you know, so like their profits worth of inventory, right, would always be available for purchase with the sarafu credit or bangla-pesa or whatever local currency they were using at the time. And so the idea was, let's make sure there's some businesses that are always the backer of last resort, right? And so that kind of opened up the playing field of saying, oh, okay, everyone can trust it because it's not about being in some little in-group. Instead, now there's a guarantee, essentially. And so that really started to reduce the amount of kind of defaulting or people saying, oh, I'm not going to accept it anymore, because they know, you know, there's always someone that's going to accept it. It became more of a commodity at that point. Rather than sort of a niche barter trade thing, currency. So that system we have called sarafu credit at that point, and sarafu credit kind of became an umbrella. So there was a sarafu credit. Sarafu means exchange or currency and credit, so it's a kind of an exchange credit. We even created new bills that were branded individually on the backs. It was a little bit cheaper to print that way. And initially we were printing for every single community their own bills, and that was super time consuming and very expensive to print them. And these are now more generic for all the communities, and we sort of individualize them with a stamp on the back to say which kind of community they're in. And so that sarafu credit model, we would say these are sarafu shops, right? The ones that are always accepting the sarafu credit. And it started really flowing and working a lot better. And so the phases of setup, the phases of implementation that I'll describe briefly here are really based on what we're currently doing. And we've taken it out of slums, and we've kind of used this same model in rural areas as well. And starting from scratch with this idea that you start by building up these kind of asset stores in the community, and the productive capacity of those assets gives you a sense of basis for how much currency to issue in the first place, how to build a trust in that currency, and that's been very effective. So, you know, to recap, we went from essentially a donor-funded event currency that was kind of eco-paisa into a pure mutual credit that was not very scalable. I mean, it was workable, but not very scalable, and then into this kind of asset cooperative-backed or productive capacity-backed currency, which we call like sarafu credit. So, I think that's a good place to stop.
Mm-hmm.